the audit committee's management of the external auditor relationship. And I know we can spend more than 10 minutes on this, but we're going to have to be pretty regimented. So Michele, I'm going to turn back to you again as someone with a lot of experience in this. What do you consider as an audit committee member? What should the audit committee consider when they're selecting an external auditor?
Okay, so I'm thinking when you say selecting an auditor, you're talking about in a situation either where you're bringing in a new auditor. And quite frankly, I've just gone through that, and it's an interesting process because it's basically almost like what you need to think about whenever you have an existing auditor and you're thinking about going forward with them and what you should be considering. We look at resources. What do they, both nationally as well as locally, do they service companies of similar size, of similar complexity? Let's say if you're in a manufacturing industry, do they have a large manufacturing client base? If you're in financial services, a large financial services base. Because you want to make sure that they have the expertise and the experience to service you and service you well. That's at the national level. You also need to make sure that they have that at the local level. You need to be sure that the local office has the resources in it that if you need to pull in for your particular audit more resources they need to draw upon than perhaps your basic team, that there's people locally that they can get, tap into and bring over to help them do whatever they need to do. So looking at that resource level is important. Looking at the resources, if you're a global company, that they have both in the regions that your company's either in or going to, and making sure you understand how quality is attained, what the expertise and track record is of the people that would be leading that audit in those regional locations, understanding how that communication works between the lead partner and those individuals that are partners in those regions, and how that communication and their responsibilities work, because you have one audit and I hold the lead partner responsible. And so I need to understand how they're dealing with those other parts of their affiliations. I'm interested in how the lead partner is selected. I always do interviews of individuals that will be lead partners on my audit, and I want to see at least 2 partners, if not 3. And I want to understand what their background and experience is, how they like to communicate, where they see the complexity, how they deal with issues, how they deal with management, et cetera. So I want to have a selection. I don't want the firm to just give me somebody. I want to look at independence with, the small number now we have of large companies that can do complex audits. We use a lot of them to do internal audit projects for us, consulting products for us, tax work, blah, blah, blah. So doing an independence check is real important when you think about what firm you're going to be using. I want to understand how they would deal with our critical accounting judgments, and what they have they reviewed the critical accounting judgments, what is their take on it? Do they agree or disagree with some of the direction that we are taking? And do they have any new approaches or new thinking that we should be thinking about and considering? I want to understand how you transition for the work from one firm to another firm, and have they thought about how they would need to integrate and bring themselves into the organization? So there is a lot of work in terms of both the expertise and experience of the firm, but also their understanding and knowledge of my company and how they would indeed work with the critical issues that we have, how they would understand where the risk areas are, and whether or not they understand the culture of our company and the management team expertise that we have, and how they would work with that. The other aspect I would say is, and I spend a lot of time and focus on this, is how they deal with internal audit within a firm. I believe that there needs to be a much more robust relationship between external auditors and internal auditors. I think there needs to be more reliance on internal audit. I think they need to understand, we need to understand how they make that intersection and what they would like to do. So in general, quickly, that's what I would be looking at.
Okay, so Bob, I'm going to ask you, what are audit committees, once the auditor's selected, what do you see audit committees doing today to evaluate the external auditor? And I'm going to turn to Brian and ask him to take that one step further. What are they doing with respect to some of the information that's available out there, PCOB inspection results, what happens when there's an indicator of negative quality, and what actions do you see audit committees taking if there is something hanging out there today? So,
yeah, let me take that first part. I mean, generally the kinds of things we see, and let's go back to Michelle's point about what we promise. We're going to deliver a quality audit in a certain time frame at a certain cost. So, you know, delivering on whatever the promise is top of mind. The continuity, leadership, and competence of the engagement team. It's a confidence thing. You know, you see a partner and a team around that partner that gives you confidence. And there's a number of service-related issues, responsiveness, issues recognition, and resolution. I'm sorry. No surprises, no last-minute difficulties to throw the 10Q, say, oh, we can't file. We just came up with something. Timeliness and so forth. One of the things that's happened in the last year, I think it was last October, is that 7-organization publication on the annual auditor assessment. It's got a lot of these things sort of swept into it, and I don't know if it's being used, but because we only have had that 1 year end so far. But that's a great tool, and I'm hoping that it gets some penetration in the market.
So Brian, are you seeing other evidence out there, like what are audit committees doing with PCOB inspection results, for example, things like that?
Well, I think most audit committees, and maybe this is that I've dealt with, and I've talked to a lot of other partners and all that, they're not sure what to do with them. I think they know there's good information in there, but what do they learn from them, and how do they apply that to their situation? Because I think we get the same questions like, well, tell me what happened in this particular issue. Yeah, like, well, if I wasn't involved, I really can't tell them what happened in that issue. But I can say, here's the general consensus of that type of issue. Here's how we interpret, here's how we apply it on this particular engagement. So there's a lot of interaction about the types of issues discovered or noted in the PCOB inspection reports. I've even seen audit committee chairmen have them all on a table, and they've lined it out, the different firms trying to connect dots, and they have really trouble doing that because it's limited samples with limited information. So I think there's a lot of discussion about the PCOB inspection reports, but in summary, I'm not sure people really know what to do with them. There's some other indicators, you know, like SEC comment letters and things like that that get a lot of attention, but they're usually company specific. You know, I don't think there's a lot of focus on what happened to your neighbor. It's always going to be what happened on a company. And I think, Bob, your point about the service issues is probably one of the things that raises audit quality, because that indicates maybe things weren't done timely enough, either a quality issue on management side or the audit side or both. For these things to hit at the last minute is an indicator there's something going on, and audit committees are keenly aware of those.
So Mark, on the research side, with respect to oversight of the external auditor, what do you see out there?
Well, you know, if you look at these as kind of the input studies and the choices that the audit committees make, some of this I think some of the research I think ties well into some of these conversations. So more independent audit committees are associated with choosing industry specialist auditors. So and there's a lot of research that shows that industry specialist auditors tend to have fewer restatements, more high quality reporting, that sort of thing. There's also evidence that independent audit committees pay higher audit fees. We mentioned that's associated with higher quality. You mentioned the relationship. There's a whole thriving and growing and fairly new research area that's quite interesting, looking at the auditor's reliance on the internal audit function. And it's such an interesting dynamic and ties into this whole thing about the client demand side being so important, right? So the amount of audit quality delivered is going to be the supply and demand where they meet. So you have to have that demand going. And this, I think, really gets to that point. And so there's a recent study that shows that clients whose internal audit function is used as a training ground for future management, auditors don't rely on those audit committees or those internal audit functions quite as much for obvious reasons. There's also evidence that independent audit committees are very concerned about minimizing perceived threats to audit quality. So they purchase, for example, less non-audit services and are less likely to hire former employees of the incumbent auditor, even though there's not a lot of research that would suggest non-audit services or former employees really do threaten quality, but there is evidence that shareholders may perceive that. So it's a kind of more of a perception than an actual issue, I think. The financial expertise is associated, the financial expertise, generally similar results, just weaker evidence, generally speaking. Meeting frequency and size, again, just fewer studies in that area. So in summary, I think there's relatively convincing evidence. It's a little bit smaller than the output studies, but these characteristics, especially independence and expertise, seem to matter.
Thank you.